Bigfoot Society would like to thank the following sponsors for helping make the podcast possible. The Singular Fortean Society has combined open and honest paranormal investigation and journalism since 2016. Visit the Society at Singular Fortean for all the latest weird news and more. Come with us and investigate the impossible. Lauren Smith is the hostess for Nightcaller's Bigfoot Radio, which has been on air for over a decade and has completed over 300 shows. Lauren brings with her a unique viewpoint given that she is not only the daughter of one of the veteran female Bigfoot researchers in the South, but she has been conducting field research since she was a preteen some 20 years ago. Nightcallers is a Bigfoot world favorite and, along with interviewing researchers and witnesses, often features interviews with guests from the documentary, film, and entertainment industry. Lauren also does a vidcast segment called Nightcallers, which features real encounters sent in by viewers. You can find all of this and more at nightcallersproductions.com. Welcome to the Bigfoot Society Clubhouse, where we discuss a new or old topic in cryptozoology every week. Just hang out and have a good time. I do need to let you know that by hanging out with us on stage and talking in the discussion, you are giving consent to being recorded, which will be used in a future Bigfoot Society podcast, YouTube video, could be anything that you could imagine coming down the pipeline. If you're not comfortable with that, please go ahead and move on down to the audience. Sit back, relax, have a good time. Again, thanks to all for hanging out, and let's just have a good time. Hey, well, thanks for coming into the Bigfoot Society Clubhouse room. We've got a packed room tonight. We're going to be talking about Bigfoot and the connection between UFOs or UAPs and aliens and all that good stuff. It's going to be a wild time, so we're going to have some fun stories and discussion, I think, and it's just going to be a good time. I am going to start out. I found this awesome article on HuffPost.com, which of course is definitely known for its, cryptid articles. But it's kind of cool. It says, is Bigfoot possibly an alien entity? And it's got stories in this article that I have never heard before, so I'm going to share a few of them. Supposedly, in the year 1888, a cattleman described an encounter with friendly Indians in Humboldt County, California. Of course, Humboldt County. They led him to a cave where he saw a hefty humanoid creature covered in long, shiny black hair with no neck, sitting cross-legged. He was told that 3 of these crazy bears had been cast out of a small moon that dropped from the sky and landed. The moon then ascended back into the air. Is it possible that the crazy bears were really Bigfoot and the moon a spacecraft? Now, fast forward to almost 100 years to 1973 to Miss Refa Heightfield. She and her 13-year-old son were sleeping in a trailer in Cincinnati, Ohio on the morning of October 21st. She arose at 2:30 a.m. to get a drink and noticed strange lights in the adjoining parking lot. Looking out the window, her attention was drawn in particular to an inexplicable cone of light shaped like a huge bubble umbrella about 7 feet in diameter. But nearby, she spotted a grayish ape-like creature with a large downward angled snout, no neck, and a sizable waist. Moving slowly, it then entered into the light. About 5 minutes later, both ape-man and UFO disappeared. This is some wild stuff. I've had some interviews on my podcast where I've talked to people about Bigfoot and orbs, but I have yet to have an interview with someone where they've seen a Bigfoot and a UFO. I'm curious to what are our thoughts on this group? Does anyone have a thought that they would like to share? Of course, I kind of said I will go ahead and pick someone. So I'm going to, Mike, I'm glad to have you here tonight along with everyone else. Mike, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, if you look at Paul Bartholomew, he kind of quotes the sightings at the same time as all the stuff was going on in the Abear Road. If you look at the Chestnut Ridge, you've got Stan Gordon and Eric Altman reporting from their research, again, a lot of UFOs and Bigfoot sightings. I kind of waver, but I kind of been looking at it myself. I just recently got some reports in some of the areas that we research. The orbs with Bigfoot, that I've personally seen, um, where in a research area you're getting orbs, and then in a few minutes later you're getting howls or screams or something like that. And that I actually have on video. It's not great video, but it's there. So you can document, and if it comes up, it comes up. But we'll see June 1st when the UFO reports come out, how close the overlays are.
Oh my goodness, you're right. Can you imagine if it's like that info comes out and it's like, guys, we actually got to talk more about Bigfoot. And that would be wild. Like, yeah, that's a good reminder, Mike. So just to clarify, have you've seen orbs and then heard Bigfoot howls like pretty close
Yeah,
proximity?
I was down in the Chestnut Ridge, down there with Altman and Steve Culls, and I kept watching these orbs. Is the only thing I can explain them at. Is try to measure them as fireflies or whatever, but they were too big, and they were in the sky up. So at first I thought they were helicopters. Then it was lower in the tree. Then it was down lower, and I was running a really cheap digital camera. This goes to make sure you got a good equipment when you're going, guys, because it was not good for night. When I lit everything up with spotlight, it just zipped by. The next night, we're out in the same area, and we were out with the whole group. It was a big camping adventure. And a young man pointed up to the trees and said, "Hey, can you see that up there?" And we watched an orb, and not 2 minutes later, we got a great scream growl come from the woods. And then my buddy Jay was there with us, and yeah, we can't. And he just recently had a sighting that was on another podcast where he mentioned seeing a creature, getting it on therm, and then getting an orb right after. So, I mean, the best thing you do is document. Is it swamp gas? Is it something else? But that anomaly is there, and it's something I can't prove, disprove, but I've got it, documented.
And I think that's the important thing, that you have that documented. That is really cool, Mike. Thank you for sharing that. All right, Mike, who would you like to choose next? I'll let you choose, man.
I am going to pick Greg because he's over the borders, because I'd like to know exactly what they've got just north of us.
I actually researched an American incident. So, sorry to disappoint you, Mike. But it is a very interesting incident, and Jeremiah mentioned the moon came down and the crazy bears got out. Well, it really reminded me of what I was looking at, the Beach 6 incident in Erie, Pennsylvania from 1966. It was July 31st of 1966 when an unidentified flying orb emitting a red light was seen above Presqu'île State Park in Erie, Pennsylvania. Several witnesses corroborated the sighting, including an encounter with a Bigfoot-like creature scratching a car's roof from atop it. There's a quote from Fred Lane, who was present at the time. What happened was there was a group of people from Jamestown, and their car got stuck. The men got out to help, said Lane. Meanwhile, they had seen this bright light. It came down, and this creature got out and came over to the car and apparently scratched the car. So I have to say that Fred Lane is, or I don't know if he still is, this article I read was from 2016. He's a volunteer investigator with MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and he is a key organizer of the Pennsylvania MUFON conference. He was there in 1966 and did witness the craft or the object, He says, I went down I went down there and saw this red light hanging over the peninsula, and it was just hanging there. And then a jet came out of the sky, and this thing just boom, gone. Um, it's quite interesting. I gotta say that 1966 was an interesting year for paranormal activity, especially West Virginia. We all know that's when the Mothman of Point Pleasant sightings started to happen. I can't really say for sure that I believe that Bigfoot are aliens, but I mean, I guess there's a good possibility. It would explain a lot of the hiding and just the impossibility it's been to find one of these things. Yeah, I really like that case of the Beach Six incident, and I think I'm going to see if Ashley has a story to share with us.
Yeah, I'm good to go. So I'm actually going to share kind of more of a personal anecdote, and that is when I first kind of came across this idea of Bigfoot as, anything other than a terrestrial, flesh and blood animal. So back in probably, I'm gonna say it was probably 2007, 2008. Back when I was a young researcher, I used to frequent the website, which I'm sure everybody here is probably familiar with, but cryptomundo.com. And a commenter had told this grand story about, an interdimensional Bigfoot. But I mean, it was in, great, great detail. And it was just discussing how he, directly worked with the government. He knows, and we know that Bigfoot possesses some type of, ultra terrestrial power that, they can turn invisible, or, they can be visible to us, or they can just kind of disappear. And I just, like I said, this was the first time that I've ever seen anything like that. And obviously it was interesting, but very, very hard to very hard to take in. But I did kind of fall into that rabbit hole, and I had kind of researched other platforms, other places of 40 news and things like that. Did find this person kind of everywhere. Whether or not his own anecdote of working closely with these creatures was real or not, I mean, of course, that's up for debate. I had never heard anything else from him. But I did want to mention, kind of going off of what Greg was talking about in the Presque Isle situation, is that that was actually, the most interesting part of that is that it was, actually a case that you can find in Project Blue Book, and it is heavily investigated, by the U.S. government during that time. And just Lake Erie in general is kind of known for having these, just very similar stories all around, not just of the UFOs, but of Bigfoot. And there is a very strong correlation between Bigfoot sightings and UFO sightings. And then just kind of my last point that I want to mention is that, it's not just, it doesn't seem to be just Bigfoot and UFOs. It actually kind of seems to be, these kind of incidents of high strangeness tend to happen repeatedly. You'll have some witnesses who, don't just, they don't just, see Bigfoot the one time and then they never have an experience ever again. Usually they go on to have, other paranormal kind of happenings surrounding their lives. I myself happen to be one of those people. I see UFOs constantly. And it was weird to me to find out that that wasn't new or normal, once I realized that this was kind of a fringe thing. So, I mean, there is definitely some kind of correlation between these people experiencing all the high strangeness. Now, Tyler Strand last week was on here when we were talking about the Patterson Gimlin film, and he was kind of talking about the like the trickster element, right? And so, I mean, I think that that can definitely play a big part. Here is that maybe what we're seeing is not necessarily Bigfoot. It's not necessarily UFOs. It's something else entirely, and that's what our mind makes it up as. But that's kind of as far as I've gotten with it.
Oh, that is awesome, Ashley. Thank you for sharing all that. I didn't know the Project Blue Book thing. That was an awesome fact to throw out. I'm gonna do a quick room reset for everyone that may have just come into the room tonight. We are talking about Bigfoot and the UFO connection. If there's anyone down in the audience and they would like to be included in the discussion, or they have incident to share, etc., feel free to raise your hand. We can definitely bring you on up. But at this time, Ashley, feel free to pick someone else.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna go with Lisa.
Hi, thanks. So I don't have a whole lot to say. I didn't even know what the topic was until I actually logged in tonight. So I didn't prepare anything, but I do have an interest in this subject, and I've often kind of thought that the chances of Bigfoot being more alien related rather than an actual like an ape or something like that made more sense to me, that it was more extraterrestrial. I mean, I think it was your podcast, Jeremiah, where I first said that I thought that maybe all cryptids are actually aliens, but who knows? But I've heard people tell me that they've seen the Bigfoot appear through the orb and things like that. I've never had any personal experience with that, so I can't say either way. You know, I tend to just kind of think that it's more likely that rather than a creature that it can stay hidden this long and not be proven to exist is more likely not of this dimension. That's it. That's all I have to say. I'll turn it over to Kenzie.
Cool. I have like a half-formed thought for you guys because I really spent my time making that stupid graph that I sent to the Discord chat instead of doing actual research. But I guess my personal opinion on this is that in the research that I have done, I guess really I don't know where I stand on, Bigfoot being flesh and blood or extraterrestrial. But I think that the biggest like link in the correlation between UFO sightings and Bigfoot sightings is just like genuinely like areas of high strangeness and the people's like I guess desire to like see something weird or like acknowledge that something is weird. And like in the case of New Hampshire, like New Hampshire does not have like the most Bigfoot reported sightings in the entire world. But I think about this a lot, and like you guys are gonna have to just follow me on this mental journey because I started talking and I don't really have a point. But um you see this a lot in like TV shows. Like I don't know how many of you guys actually watched Hellier, but like in Hellier they go and they start talking to people in these random towns in Kentucky and are basically like, oh, like what kind of strange things happen around here? And a lot of them are like, oh, well, nothing really. And then 15 minutes into the conversation, they're like, oh, well, actually one time there was this weird thing that hovered over our city for 8 hours straight, and oh, also like sometimes we see these cave people and whatever. And I think sometimes like in some of these areas like things get really normalized as like, yeah, we see that all the time, so like it's not really something that we consider weird. So it doesn't end up being reported. And as of June 24th, 2020, New Hampshire was number 3 on the list of states with the most UFO sightings. And when it comes to like the BFRO reports in New Hampshire, they're kind of low, but like they're also like kind of broken down by county, and the counties with the most sightings are way up in the woods of New Hampshire. And New Hampshire is 81% wooded. Um, that's like 4.8 million acres of woods. And I kind of really just think that like sometimes these things, like if people didn't feel like that stuff was so normalized in their area, I feel like we'd see a lot more of it. on these like, you know, maps of like where these things intersect. I don't know. Thanks for listening to me ramble. I'm just going to pass it off to someone else. I'm actually going to pass it to Aleks because, as the other New Hampshire native, I want to see what he has to say about that.
Yes, I had a bunch of thoughts about that as you were talking about that. Thanks for passing me the mic. Hope everyone's doing well tonight. Thanks for coming on into the group here. Awesome chat. Definitely a topic that a lot of, I think, Bigfoot researchers either are overly obsessed with or shy away from entirely. This whole UFO connection. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my kind of personal experiences. I don't really know where to stand. I mean, I personally think that Bigfoot is probably something flesh and blood. Now, I do have a bit of a weird perspective on the whole paranormal phenomena, whether you want to call it, you know, ghost stuff or UFOs or cryptids. I don't know. I think what's paranormal now will probably be normal in like 50, 60 years when we understand what's actually going on. I think it's totally normal. It's just beyond our 3D, you know, have to see it to believe it kind of mentality that we have. I mean, if I tried to go back 200 years ago and explain Wi-Fi technology to people, I'd probably be called a wizard. So that's just kind of my weird perspective on the paranormal. Now, that being said, you know, having spoken to probably hundreds of Bigfoot eyewitnesses at this point, majority of them are basically just saying they saw an animal that behaved as in a way that a biological animal would. Now, that doesn't mean Bigfoot might not have some weird abilities that we just can't explain right now. But I have met credible people who claim that Bigfoot is, you know, some sort of interdimensional thing or can teleport or have some kind of weirder abilities that have claimed UFO connections. But I've also met people who claim Bigfoot's paranormal, but it has nothing to do with UFOs. It has more to do with orbs. So I guess it kind of just depends. I've seen actually one of my personal experiences with a UFO was in Pennsylvania, and I really like the flap area idea. And I think Ashley and maybe somebody else mentioned stuff about high strangeness and these kind of areas where there seems to be an overlap in phenomena going on. And there was this area that really opened my eyes a little bit more to the weirder side of things in Pennsylvania. Investigating with some colleagues, used to go a couple of years in a row, and I interviewed 3 generations of a family that had Bigfoot activity going on their property. Really interesting. It's one of the interviews on my channel, Pennsylvania Bigfoot Witnesses, because I interviewed literally it was a grandmother, her son, and his daughter all together. They've had weird stuff happen, and not only just Bigfoot, but their whole families had weird stuff happen. And that area of central Pennsylvania has a lot of stuff going on. So I kind of went into it. I was like, I don't really care about this other stuff. I'm more interested in the Bigfoot. And the second year I was there, we actually had a UFO experience with a bunch of my colleagues who were there, you know, Paulino, a bunch of people as well who were more involved in the UFO field. And, you know, we managed to film this thing on night vision. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen. Now, was there a connection to Bigfoot there? I don't personally know. All I know is it happened in the same place where there's a lot of reports where people like Eric Altman investigate and Stan Gordon at some point, and as well as Sean Forker, who's actually had experiences at the same property that I was investigating with my friends. He had had previous activity there, and some of the other group members that I was with actually 5-6 years ago had a Bigfoot experience on that property while they were looking for UFOs. It's like you go looking for one thing and another thing happens. That sort of seems to be a theme. So that's kind of where you know, my interest in the UFO subject sort of took off. I'm not as interested in it as I am in Bigfoot, but I think it's really interesting. And just to touch up on what Kenzie was talking about in terms of New Hampshire reports, what's really crazy about New Hampshire is, yeah, we have a lot of UFO history, whether it be the Betty and Barney Hill case, which is widely regarded as one of the first kind of abduction stories that really went mainstream. You've got the Exeter UFO incident. So there's a lot of UFO reports. There's a lot of Bigfoot reports too, and that's not reflected at all online. I was actually just recently in touch with this guy. I think his handle is Josh PNW Bigfoot Maps or something like that on Instagram. He has some great reports, and he puts these maps together basically with Bigfoot sightings. I was sending him some of the New Hampshire data, and I know the New Hampshire BFRO researcher Crystal Panic, she has 239 total reports for the state of New Hampshire, of which there's only 15 publicly available on the BFRO website online. So there's a lot to close up. And I have about 30 or so, 30, 40 of my own that I've been told personally that, you know, weren't online anywhere, that I either was told about or somebody knew somebody who'd had that happen to them. So there's a lot of those reports. I've heard a few stories with the UFO stuff in New Hampshire, but mostly it's been, like I said, kind of flesh and blood. But yeah, it's an interesting topic. I could talk all day about it, I'm sure. But I don't know where I stand. I think maybe there's an overlap. Maybe Bigfoot likes flap areas. Maybe there's a connection. I just don't think we understand it enough, and hopefully someday we will. So yeah, thanks for listening to my thoughts on this, guys.
I agree. Once you start looking for one thing, you kind of start noticing the other things too, or maybe something else will start noticing you. You don't know. So, very interesting thoughts there on state of New Hampshire. Aleks, who would you like to speak next?
I know Tate likes to close it out, so I'm gonna go with I'm gonna go with Nick.
Hey, what's up, guys? All right, so yeah, I just kind of wanted to jump in here and give my thoughts, kind of like a high strangeness junkie. So this is right up my alley. Um, yeah, so kind of what I wanted to cover first was that there's sort of a distinction with UFOs or UAPs. They're kind of classified into two categories: anomalous lights or structured craft, right? So we're really familiar with like the anomalous light sort of following Bigfoot around, just these orbs that kind of manifest. Digging into some folklore out here in California, that's kind of my specialty. I was able to find something about the Maricopa Native people. They had this creature that was known as the Kuiahomar. Hope I didn't butcher that. I probably did. Which was essentially like a giant hairy ogre-like creature. But they always classified it as being seen by giant fireballs, kind of following it around. So I always thought that was kind of interesting. Jacques Vallée, the famous ufologist, always kind of associated, lights kind of with like the Fey folk, and kind of some connections there to Bigfoot, which I always kind of thought was interesting. Bigfoot and aliens, he sort of had that crossover between Fey folk and alien beings. And actually, Jeremiah, the story you brought up was interesting because that took place in California. I think Brad Steiger figured that one out about the crazy bear and coming down from like a small moon. So I thought that was really interesting. One of the more interesting stories I kind of found out here in California was there's a town called Atascadero where basically a guy. This was reported in the Bigfoot Files, a book by Peter Gattia. He saw a guy, or basically saw a giant craft flash a giant red light in his front yard, and it released two Bigfoot. They kind of just like ran out of the craft, off into the distance, and the craft just vanished in the sky. So that's one of the like most like up in your face sort of. Here's a Bigfoot. Here's a UFO, and there's a connection there. Sort of stories I was ever able to find. So there's definitely like an interesting connection there. I think it's kind of taboo for a lot of cryptozoologists and a lot of ufologists too to kind of find a correlation between the two. Kind of one of the only people I can really think of is Stan Gordon, who's been mentioned a couple of times. Kind of championing all that stuff. Kind of back in Pennsylvania, which has been brought up tonight, which is sort of one of the lands of weird high strangeness. But I think John Green once said, he didn't really like the connection between aliens and or UFOs and Bigfoot. He'd rather think it was just a coincidence. So I think it's kind of it's kind of up to the new generation of cryptozoologists to maybe kind of leave that door open. And kind of do our due diligence to kind of look at these patterns and these sort of weird things that are coming out now, like the high strangeness. We have people like Dr. Jeff Meldrum who written books that basically can prove there's something physical out there. There's something walking around, leaving evidence. Like that part is solidified. But like we were talking about, there's so many anecdotal stories of a crossover here that the BFRO usually just kind of throws out, doesn't really want to talk about. So I think it's really important for the next generation to kind of do their due diligence, look into the phenomenon and see if there's anything there, see if there's any dots to connect. That's part of the ongoing mystery. And just to kind of wrap up, kind of like Mike said, one interesting thing I've noticed is that no matter if you have the best equipment, you have a great camera, anything, when you start to delve into these areas of high strangeness, the phenomenon, if that's what you want to call it, tends to negate any kind of presentation of itself, any sort of chance to kind of catch the phenomenon in action. John Keel was really, really big on that. That it just, it was the trickster element, like we talked about, that just doesn't, something about the weird unspokenness doesn't want to be found. So I think that's really interesting, and thanks for getting my 2 cents on all that.
Nick, that was really good. I mean, just the reminder that being able to discuss like adults with people that don't necessarily agree with what you or hold with what you hold is huge. And like, maybe we don't hang out with the UFO crowd all the time, but like we can talk to them and they might have info that can help us in our Bigfoot or cryptid research and kind of back and forth. And I've seen stuff like that happen all the time on Clubhouse. But yeah, thank you for your thoughts. Definitely. Tate, best for last, of course. So go ahead, my man.
Okay, so yeah, I think everybody here made a lot of great points. But like my opinion, I don't know. I don't believe there's a connection in UFOs and Bigfoots just because I believe they're a natural biological animal, and for an animal being a natural animal like bears, you don't see UFOs with bears. So, in my opinion, I don't think there'd be UFOs associated with any Bigfoot sightings just because of that reason. That's just my opinion. That being said, I did film a UFO. If it was alien or not, probably not. Who knows? It could have been military, but it was still a UFO nonetheless. Unidentified flying object. So, yeah, it falls in the category of UFO. I did film a UFO on a Bigfoot expedition. I was actually using one of Matt Moneymaker's Gen 3 night vision scope, and I have that on footage, which I'll put in the Discord, and you can make it public or wherever you want to do with it. So, yeah, I didn't have much to say, but that's just what I wanted to get out there.
Go ahead, Greg.
Say it's just another one of those coincidences, I guess, as the researchers like to call them, where you're on a Bigfoot expedition and you're seeing UAPs, UFOs. It's just seems like a really small world in the paranormal world.
I think I saw Moneymaker tweeting about that recently.
Okay, Moneymaker has been tweeting things that have been blowing my mind. And someone has got to, I'm trying to talk to this guy, but someone's got to interview this dude because he is tweeting out stuff that's crazy, like tech he wants to put in with Bigfooting and stuff. Like, oh man, it'd be a cool interview. But
I'll probably be talking to him in
June. Yeah, totally. Try and get that, man, if you can. But like he was talking about like live streaming during Bigfoot hunts and having like people looking for Bigfoot over the internet or something like that. Like that'd be some wild stuff, dude.
Actually, Matt tweeted. I sent him the video because it was his expedition that I helped organize, the BFR01 in Southern California. And so I sent him the video after I got it, and he tweeted it out and everything, and gave me video credit for it. So that was super cool.
I gotta follow up on Tate's thing though with the bear and UFO. We don't see bear and UFO, but we do see a lot of cows, to quote my buddy Steve, with UFOs. So, are cows aliens? That's my question.
Wait. Whoa. So
I see what Mike's saying. I get that.
That's funny.
That's so hilarious.
So you're saying like the cows are seen around the UFOs, or like go more into detail, Mike?
The mutilations.
Sorry, duh.
Yeah. But that's a Steve Culls thing because he always
Okay.
gets that question about Bigfoot and UFOs, and I've been with him so many times with that, and it's like, well, you see a lot of cows with UFOs, and you see the mutilations and everything like that. So where's the correlation there? And I'm still a flesh and blood guy, but the stuff I've seen around in that documentation, it just kind of it blows my mind. Like everybody said, is just that paranormal aspect. And like I said, again, to go to Nick's thing, where things go bad. Last night I was working a Class A sighting. All night long, the thermal cam work. We go to pull onto the road where the Class A sighting was. And sure enough, the weather changed enough to mess up the thermal cam all night long. So we can't figure this out. Again, it's that paranormal. Who knows what's going on?
I was gonna say too, like again, like from my personal background, I'm not gonna get into it right now, but there's another reason. I just don't think there is life on other planets. I know that's probably an unpopular, thing to say, but at the same time, it's what I believe. I'm not forcing on anybody, and I'm not. It's just what I believe. So that's another reason I don't think there's a connection between aliens and Bigfoot, just because I don't think aliens can be real. But that, again, unpopular opinion, but that's my opinion.
Hey, and that's all right, man. One thing that I've been trying to wrap my mind around as I go through this, like, the podcast journey, interviewing different types of people is, so as of right now, I'm thinking Bigfoot, flesh and blood, great ape. How am I explaining away all the reports where there's, these orbs seen, or like you've got the videos, just the different orbs associated with the Bigfoot, and I don't know how to answer that yet. That's something I'm still working, trying to figure out. But I don't know if anyone has had that same, inner dialogue, if they're holding that, Bigfoot is a great ape, but then how are they explaining away, the orbs? I don't know. It's something I'm working through.
Yeah, I mean that's what's so interesting about it, and I think, like I was saying earlier, just not really sure. As somebody that sits more in the flesh and blood camp, it's almost like different areas seem to have more of a connection with the UFO-ness, kind of like Pennsylvania seems to be a big hotspot for Bigfoot and UFO type stuff. But then again, it comes back to like, what even is the paranormal? What are UFOs? Are they even aliens? Are they interdimensional? Are they, there's just so many different kind of pathways, I suppose, you can go down. But I think Nick was talking about it. The new generation is a little bit more open, I'd say. But in the past, there were definitely researchers and organizations that would wholeheartedly discount any sort of UFO connection. I think that left a lot of people jaded. I as I said earlier, I most of the people I've ever talked to, flesh and blood. I mean, they didn't. If it is paranormal, it didn't exhibit any characteristics that would indicate it had some sort of weird abilities. But there are those people, and I'm not going to disregard them or tell them, well, hey, just because it doesn't fit my narrative, I'm not going to tell you, what you saw or what you didn't see, because that's not what I'm about. I mean, just can you? I'm just getting poor connection here. I don't know. It's just, I think it's about the open-mindedness at the end of the day, and even if it doesn't agree with your personal paradigm, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. I mean, we know that there are stranger things out there than we can understand at the moment. So I think it's just about keeping an open mind, I'd say.
I mean, if they are not from this world, it doesn't mean that they're not flesh and blood. They're just flesh and blood from somewhere else.
That's a good point. I was on a podcast with Ron Moorhead about 6 months ago, and we all kind of go to Ron for the sounds, but he talks about the stuff up there at Sierra with seeing physical stuff, seeing UFOs, and seeing the orbs, and it's kind of an interesting how they had all that happen up there at that Sierra camp.
That's actually interesting, Mike, that you brought up Ron Moorhead, because I was just going to jump in. There's with the Sierra Sounds, there's actually like a small little following of like occultists and people that are sort of into like kind of like the works of Aleister Crowley and kind of weird stuff like that, that have actually listened to the Sierra sounds and given a really odd and interesting perspective, where they've said that the sort of the grunts and noises, the kind of samurai-ish sounds that they're called, resemble something called barbarous word, which is essentially just like occult incantation. So yeah, I mean, if you really want to dive into stuff, like, you can link a lot of interesting Bigfoot things to the strangest paranormal phenomenon out there. There's even stuff now where there's like a woman in white connection. I think somebody brought up that at the end of the movie Willow Creek, they decided to plug in a woman in white there. You'll get Bigfoot linked to. I just did a story on my Instagram about a Bigfoot sighting, a reoccurring Bigfoot sighting at a home in Southern California outside of LA, that ended with like a black-eyed kid encounter, which is like a common like creepypasta thing on the internet. And all this stuff is like vetted and verified by different paranormal researchers that are kind of a little bit more notable, been on conferences and stuff like that. So some of the stuff is vetted. It's not just sort of online chatter. So it's interesting, the high strangeness aspect of Bigfoot, and you kind of slam it against the flesh and blood, hard science of it all. It really makes you question, like, what is going on behind the scenes with all these things. And yeah, it's why I love looking into all this stuff.
Dude, Nick, that's it's a wild take on Rotten Moorhead.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Can I say one thing real quick? I promise
yes.
I'll let Jenny
yeah, exactly. Yep.
No, it's interesting mentioning Ron Moorhead. Because he's been kind of known recently for the quantum Bigfoot, and talking a little bit on the woo side in what the Bigfoot community. I recently met him when I was up in the Olympic Project. I didn't know he was actually a member, because the Olympic Project, most of the guys are pretty hardcore flesh and blood, and they have some of the best Bigfoot evidence, in my opinion. But it's really interesting to find out that Ron Moorhead actually is a member of the Olympic Project. So even those guys are they're open to some of the possibilities. And I've talked to other Bigfoot researchers too, some BFRO members that are like, yeah, I mean, we've had orb stuff happen in our Bigfoot areas, and they just don't know what to make of it. So definitely really interesting, especially when you bring up that kind of weirder connection. But Jenny, please go for it.
Oh, hello. Thanks for having me. So I am all things paranormal. I love reading and watching everything that I can about aliens and Bigfoot and the goblins that happen to appear in Hellier, Kentucky. Have y'all watched Hellier?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Okay, yeah,
yep.
That's a great series.
Yeah.
It really piqued my interest back up again, and I think a conversation was had about the connection between Bigfoot and UFOs. I think something that I was talking to my friend last night, and he was talking about how there's the theory that we are all seeded here by aliens, because if you look at meteorites and rocks and gems that come out of the sky, I mean, those are considered extraterrestrial, so why wouldn't I'm trying to tie it all together. I really am, so just bear with me. So if the things that come out that the alien, I'm sorry, I'm really getting my words mixed up.
No, you're good. Go ahead. Yeah, you're good.
Why wouldn't a Bigfoot be just like another race of alien that was dropped off down here or seeded, and it was kind of like an experiment gone wrong? And because how do they disappear so fast? They're such large beings, and like I think Aleks, you mentioned something about them being on a different dimension. Who knows if they're hopping from dimension to dimension? How do they disappear so fast? That's what I want to know too. So thank you. That's all I have to say.
Oh, thank you for bringing up those thoughts. And I mean, like, there's so many different ways to think about this topic, and that was a very awesome way of thinking about this. Thank you for sharing, Jenny. Sorry. Tate, I just wanted to remind everyone real quick, we have about 15 minutes left in the room. So if you have something to add to this discussion, feel free to raise your hand and we'll bring you up. But Tate, go ahead.
I was gonna say when I was on this UFO expedition, Bobo showed up, and me, Bobo, and this other researcher that was there, um, we just kind of went to do like a little solo night out squatching. So it's just the three of us, which is pretty cool. I was able to record a knock. But anyway, Bobo was telling us that he had, I think he saw a UFO one time squatching. He was talking about it looked like a triangle. So if any of you guys ever get him on your podcast again, definitely talk to him about UFOs and orbs, because I know he's seen them and stuff like that, and he's told me a few stories.
Oh, I mean, hopefully someday that would be amazing. Paul, we brought you up on stage. I saw your hand. Welcome. What brings you up to stage?
I just had some comments to make. This is my first time here. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I think something that I've heard over and over is that, we throw around the term flesh and blood, and Bigfooting is not a formal scientific discipline, and one of the results of that is that a lot of times language is loosely thrown around compared to a discipline that has very specific meanings. And I think it's important to distinguish that something that's considered flesh and blood, I don't think very many people are arguing that Bigfoot, doesn't interact with our environment and there's not any physical evidence. But it's saying something much different to say it's a natural, undiscovered species. Though to me, those are two different things. And Aleks, your take on crossing the bridge between paranormal and the cryptid world, and what we commonly think of as everyday observations in science, eventually we'll come to understand things that are strange as something that's quite normal. That's my absolute philosophy, and you can look at points back in world history and in scientific history where things that seemed impossible suddenly just become everyday normal. That said, I'm new to the cryptid world. I'm actually a biologist, a zoologist, and something that I've seen in reading and listening to people with a lot more knowledge about this topic than myself, such as Mike, is that people tend to overlook the weirdness that was mentioned by one of your earlier speakers, because they have a paradigm that Bigfoot is a natural, I almost said it myself, a natural species that evolved, and therefore anything strange that happens along with that, those are data that get thrown out. And so there's probably a lot more weirdness going on, but it's just left out. I don't want to keep rambling, so
No, that's a great point, Paul. And kudos to you for being in your field, but also being open to coming into cryptozoology and looking into the weird, as he said. That's really cool. So we're glad that you're hanging out with us. Thank you.
Yeah, really interesting, Paul. Thanks for coming in. Just, I think about this a lot. Even the concept of germs, right? People weren't really aware of germs until, I believe, the later part of the 1800s, the early 20th century. And, how much effect does that have? And talk about today, especially everything going on. So, it's just interesting how you have these big kind of paradigm shifts. And, I'm right there with you. I think maybe one day we'll understand. Maybe it won't happen in any of our lifetimes, but it's certainly interesting to ponder and try to get to the bottom of it, or at least on a personal level.
we are getting to almost to the end of our time. Want to make sure, if anyone has any closing thoughts, feel free to say them at this time. Also, hey, we're at the end. Has anyone seen Sasquatch on Hulu? I still have to watch it. I have not seen it yet.
Are you done recording?
Hold on. I will be right now.